Hi class, my name is Miss Moody. I did just want to address that real quick. Also, I will be speaking pretty fast, so if at any time you need to pause the video, totally fine. There's also some references at the bottom of the handout that I've given you that goes along with this video. And without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to be addressing a little bit about the history of special education in the U.S. specifically. And to open up, I just like the quote that the Brown versus Board of Education judicial movement says. So I want to read it and open with that. It says, "In these days, it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if he is denied the opportunity of an education." This is also how Wright's Law opens up their page, in which they address the history of special education and how it came to be today. For further information, please go to their website at the bottom of the handout, and I'll give you a brief synopsis of what they say. In the 19th and 20th century, many non-English speaking immigrants were brought to America. They weren't respected, and people used prejudice to fight the notion that those children should be educated with their children, as those children were of lower status. They weren't good enough. A man named Mann, spelled M-A-N-N, suggested that all children would be educated together. In that way, they are learning to respect each other, and they all get an equal, or as equal as possible, start for life. So in socializing the children, all were required to go to school, even those who were poor and had larger dropout rates, as well as smaller attendance rates. Parents were then required to send those children to school and could be prosecuted if they didn't. Special education was fairly created for those who were at-risk students in urban areas and increased when including classes taught such as carpentry and other manual jobs to prepare students for the workforce. In the 19th century, specific schools were home to those who were deaf and blind, and those schools increased as time went on. In the 1940s, schools were introduced for those with brain injury. These schools were often private, expensive, and also very rare for those with disabilities, so we can't say that many people got very much help. Then in 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education came into place. We're pretty familiar with that. That is where African American children should not be segregated nor should have inferior education to others. That segregation in schooling was banned, and this opened up a door for parents of children with disabilities to complain and file against their schools for segregating their own children with disabilities as well. Then in 1965, ESCA, or the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This act meant that the government would help schools reach underprivileged children with resources and money used for privileged as well. It also meant that the government would improve education for those with disabilities. In the 1970s, the Education of the Handicapped Act had developed educational programs for those with disabilities within the states. Then Park and Mills happened in 1970. Park, which means the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children versus the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. There was the exclusion of children with mental retardation from public schools. So this turned into it that this was deemed that educational placement decisions must include a process of parental participation and means to resolve disputes, that those children just couldn't be tossed aside. Then with Mills versus the Board of Education of District of Columbia, this dealt with the suspending, expelling, and excluding of children with disabilities from the district and the public schools. Defenses for the school was the expense of children with disabilities was high, but ultimately due process was required not based on the disability, and the student could not be punished for their disability and what they had caused. In 1972, the Congressional Investigation of Special Education Students deemed that children were not receiving an appropriate education. About 3.9 million out of 8 were not receiving an appropriate, and 1.75 did not receive any services at all. Then the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or otherwise known as FERPA, happened in 1974 to protect students as well as their information from being shared with others. In 1975, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act happened, which means that Congress wanted those who had disabilities to have a right to education and established safeguards, specifically the safeguards to protect those students' rights. In 2004, IDEA, which is Individuals with Disability Education Improvement Act, was modified. This focused on the accountability increases with reading, early intervention, and research-based instruction, with the requirement of highly qualified education teachers, especially for those with disabilities. IDEA itself is the law that ensures that education according to the individual needs of a child is for a functioning adult of society and protects both that student's rights as well as the rights of their parents. In 2004, IDEA and NCLB was aligned. The purpose of the No Child Left Behind Act in 2001 was to ensure that children had a fair, equal, and significant opportunity with each other. This went away, and Every Student Succeeds Act came in. This was just the modified version. This happened in 2015 under Obama and required highly qualified teachers as well as other modifications. In 2020, we still do need work. Many reported actually that fewer than half of the states were in compliance with federal special education laws. So we still do need to fight for this. And it's up to you to know your laws as well as to be able to advocate for you and your student. And if you're a teacher that is watching this video, fight for your students and for their parents as well. If you do want to look into this further, I know that 5 minutes is not enough to go through this all, but please go look at the Arizona Department of Education, linked at the bottom of this page, as well as the U.S. Department of Education. And something that is especially helpful to parents that I found is specialeducationguide.com. This will walk through your child's disabilities as well as your rights and responsibilities as the parent. Thank you guys all for watching. It was nice seeing you, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.